They thought humans were just another weak species scattered across distant worlds, ripe for conquest. The Zeltharian Empire had crushed hundreds of civilizations with their overwhelming fleets, reducing proud worlds to ash and memory. When their sensors detected the small human colony of New Eden, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the galaxy, it seemed like nothing more than target practice. The attack lasted mere hours. Orbital bombardment turned fertile farmlands into glass craters. Plasma cannons vaporized cities where children had played just moments before. Within a single rotation of their homeworld, 2.3 million human souls were erased from existence. The Zeltharians celebrated another easy victory, already plotting their next conquest. But, in the depths of space, automated distress beacons carried a single message across the void: New Eden has fallen. Remember us. What the Zeltharians didn't know was that they had just made the most catastrophic mistake in galactic history. They had attacked humanity's first successful agricultural colony, a world that fed dozens of other human settlements. More importantly, they had murdered the families of Admiral Sarah Chen's Third Fleet, currently stationed in the Outer Rim. As the distress signals reached human space, something ancient and primal awakened in the hearts of Earth's children. For the first time in their peaceful expansion across the stars, humanity would show the galaxy why their ancestors had clawed their way to the top of Terra's food chain. The Armada of Vengeance was about to be born, and the Zeltharian Empire would learn that destroying a human colony wasn't just a military victory. It was a declaration of war against the most dangerous predator the universe had ever known. Some mistakes echo across the cosmos. This was one of them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the wheat fields of New Eden as Maria Santos finished her daily inspection of the eastern sector. The golden stalks swayed gently in the breeze, heavy with grain that would soon feed colonies across 3 different star systems. She smiled, wiping sweat from her brow as she watched her 10-year-old daughter Carmen chase butterflies between the rows. Life on New Eden was simple, peaceful, and exactly what humanity had hoped for when they first reached for the stars. "Mom, look at this one," Carmen called out, cupping her hands around a brilliant blue butterfly with wings that shimmered like jewels. "It's so pretty." Maria walked over, her boots crunching softly on the rich soil. "That's a crystal wing, sweetheart. They only come out when the weather's perfect." She ruffled her daughter's dark hair. Just like today. The colony of New Eden had been humanity's first successful agricultural world beyond Earth's solar system. Established 15 years ago with just 5,000 volunteers, it had grown into a thriving community of over 2 million souls. The planet's unique soil composition and dual sun system created perfect growing conditions for dozens of Earth crops, making it the breadbasket that supplied newer, less established colonies. Dr. James Patterson, the colony's chief administrator, stood on the observation deck of the Central Command building, watching the daily bustle of New Eden's capital city below. Farmers brought their harvests to the processing centers, children played in the parks their parents had built from nothing, and construction crews worked on expanding the residential districts. It was everything they had dreamed of when they first left Earth's overcrowded cities behind. His wrist communicator chimed softly. "Dr. Patterson, we're receiving some unusual energy readings from our long-range sensors," came the voice of Lieutenant Torres from the monitoring station. Patterson frowned. "What kind of readings?" "Large objects moving in formation at the edge of our system. They don't match any human ship configurations in our database." A chill ran down Patterson's spine. In 15 years of peaceful expansion, humanity had encountered 3 other sentient species, all of whom had proven friendly or at least neutral. But the galaxy was vast, and they all knew that not every first contact would be pleasant. "Alert status yellow," Patterson ordered. "Begin evacuation protocols for the outer settlements, and send a message to Earth Command. Let them know we might have visitors." Across the colony, warning sirens began to wail, but they were gentle, almost musical tones designed not to cause panic. Most colonists had never heard them before. They looked up from their work with curiosity rather than fear, unsure what the sounds meant. In the farmlands, Maria gathered Carmen close as other families began moving toward the emergency shelters that had been built but never used. "What's happening, Mom?" Carmen asked, her voice small and worried. Probably just a drill, baby. Remember what we practiced in school? We go to the safe places and wait for the all clear. But Maria's hand shook as she pulled out her communicator to call her husband David, who was working the night shift at the orbital defense platform. The call wouldn't connect. High above New Eden's atmosphere, the orbital defense platform Heaven's Gate was humanity's first and only military installation in the system. Its crew of 200 had trained for years to defend the colony, though everyone hoped they would never need to. Commander David Santos stared at the tactical display in growing horror as dozens of massive ships dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge. "My God," whispered his tactical officer, Lieutenant Kumar. "Those ships are enormous. The largest one has to be 20 kilometers long." David's throat went dry as he counted the contacts. 47 ships, all of them dwarfing anything in humanity's fleet. "Give me a direct line to Earth Command, Priority Alpha," he ordered, "and power up all weapons systems." "Sir, at that range, our weapons can't even—" "I know," David cut him off. "But if we're going down fighting." The alien fleet, sleek vessels of dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, moved with terrifying precision through New Eden's system. On the bridge of the flagship Dominion's Edge, Fleet Commander Zekthal studied the readings from the small human world with satisfaction. "A productive agricultural colony," his science officer reported. "Minimal defenses, just a single orbital platform. Population approximately 2.3 million. Zekthal's reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among the Zeltharians. "Perfect for our needs. The slaves will be useful for expanding our own agricultural production." For 300 years, the Zeltharian Empire had expanded across the galaxy by conquering weaker species. Their philosophy was simple: the strong took from the weak, and resistance only prolonged suffering. They had crushed civilizations that had existed for millennia, turning proud species into slave laborers for their ever-growing empire. "Begin the assault," Zekthal commanded. "Standard protocol: destroy military installations, disable infrastructure, preserve the population for processing." The Zeltharian fleet opened fire. Streams of plasma that glowed like captured stars reached across the void toward New Eden. The first volley targeted Heaven's Gate, David Santos's orbital platform. David had just enough time to send a final message to his wife before the station was vaporized in a flash of superheated gas and molten metal. Maria was helping other families into the underground shelter when the sky above New Eden turned bright as noon, even though the sun had set an hour ago. The plasma bombardment had begun, and the peaceful world was about to become a graveyard. "Mom, what's that light?" Carmen asked, pointing upward through the shelter's small window. Maria pulled her daughter away from the window, just as the first plasma bolt struck the processing centers on the colony's edge. The explosions were visible even through the thick bunker walls as massive fireballs erupted across the landscape. The sound came later, a rolling thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the planet. In the central command building, Dr. Patterson watched helplessly as his life's work was destroyed. The communication arrays were the first to go, cutting New Eden off from the rest of human space. Then, the power plants, plunging entire districts into darkness. The plasma bombardment was surgical, precise, designed to cripple rather than completely destroy. "Sir, we need to get you to the emergency bunker," urged Lieutenant Torres, grabbing Patterson's arm. But Patterson shook his head, watching the tactical display as it showed one target after another going offline. "There's no point. Look at their pattern of attack. They're not trying to kill everyone. They want slaves." The bombardment continued for 3 hours. Plasma cannons reduced the carefully tended farmlands to fields of glass. The cities where families had built their dreams were turned to rubble and ash. The lakes where children had learned to swim boiled away into steam. But the aliens were methodical. They left just enough infrastructure intact to house survivors, and their targeting was careful to minimize casualties in certain areas. The Zeltharians had perfected the art of conquest, leaving behind a broken population that was too traumatized to resist, but still capable of labor. When the bombardment finally stopped, New Eden was a shadow of its former self. The golden wheat fields were gone, replaced by cracked earth and cooling glass. The cities were ruins, their towers collapsed into piles of twisted metal. The air itself was thick with ash and the acrid smell of vaporized metal. In her underground shelter, Maria held Carmen close as they listened to the terrible silence above. Other families huddled together in the darkness, waiting for word that would never come. Their communicators had died when the power grid was destroyed, leaving them isolated and afraid. "When can we go home, Mom?" Carmen whispered. Maria closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know, baby. I don't know." Across the colony, in dozens of similar shelters, the surviving humans waited in the darkness. They had lost everything in a matter of hours, transformed from free colonists into potential slaves by beings they had never seen. The careful work of 15 years, the dreams of 2 million people, the hopes of humanity's expansion into the galaxy, all of it lay in ruins above their heads. But, in the depths of space, automated emergency beacons were already carrying word of New Eden's fall toward human space. The messages were simple, transmitted on frequencies that every human ship and station monitored constantly. New Eden has fallen. Orbital defenses destroyed. Colony under attack by unknown alien force. Estimated 40-plus enemy vessels. David Santos, Heaven's Gate Station. Transmission ends. Emergency Beacon 77 Alpha, New Eden Colony. We are under attack. Massive alien fleet. Dr. James Patterson, Colonial Administrator. God help us all. Last transmission from New Eden Agricultural Collective. They came without warning. Remember us. These final messages raced through hyperspace toward Earth, toward the other human colonies, toward the Third Fleet stationed in the Outer Rim. They carried more than just information about New Eden's destruction. They carried the voices of the dead, the cries of the enslaved, and the seeds of something terrible and beautiful that would soon take root in human hearts across the galaxy. In the ruins of New Eden, Zeltharian ground forces began their descent, ready to process the survivors and claim another world for their empire. They had no idea that they had just made the most catastrophic mistake in galactic history. They had attacked humanity's children, and humanity was about to show the galaxy exactly what that meant. Admiral Sarah Chun was reviewing fleet deployment reports in her quarters aboard the battleship Indomitable when the emergency alert klaxons began wailing throughout the Third Fleet's command ship. After 30 years of military service, she had learned to read the different tones of alarm, and this one made her blood run cold. Priority Alpha. Incoming hyperspace communication. All senior staff to battle stations. She was already pulling on her uniform jacket when her aide, Commander Rebecca Walsh, burst through the door. "Admiral, we're receiving multiple emergency transmissions from the direction of New Eden. The signals are, ma'am, their final transmissions." Sarah's heart stopped. Her sister Maria lived on New Eden with her family, along with 1,500 other relatives of Third Fleet personnel. The agricultural colony had been a source of pride for the fleet. Their families were helping to build humanity's future among the stars. "Show me," Sarah commanded, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her chest. In the command center, the bridge crew stood at rigid attention as the communications officer played back the intercepted messages. The transmission quality was poor, distorted by distance, and the violent electromagnetic interference of a world under attack. But the words came through clearly enough. David Santos's voice echoed across the bridge. "Heaven's Gate Station, transmission ends." The tactical officer's voice broke slightly as he added, "Admiral, David Santos was Maria Santos's husband. They have a daughter, Carmen, age 10. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling something cold and terrible begin to crystallize in her chest. When she opened them again, every person on the bridge took an involuntary step back. They had served under Admiral Chun for years, had seen her in battle against pirates and intense negotiations with alien governments, but they had never seen this look in her eyes. "How many of our people had family on New Eden?" she asked quietly. Commander Walsh checked her tablet. 1,537 fleet personnel have immediate family members on New Eden. Another 4,000 have extended family or close friends. The bridge fell silent except for the soft humming of the ship's systems. Every person present understood what those numbers meant. Nearly a third of the Third Fleet had just lost someone they loved. "Captain Morrison," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the command center with absolute authority. Signal all ships in the fleet. Emergency recall. All personnel to return to their vessels immediately. We're moving to battle stations. Admiral, Captain Morrison said carefully. Our orders from Earth Command are to maintain position in the Outer Rim. The Covenant border situation. The Covenant can wait. Sarah cut him off. Our families cannot. As the Third Fleet prepared to move, the news of New Eden's destruction raced through human space like wildfire. On Mars, President Elena Vasquez was pulled from a cabinet meeting to receive the devastating report. The president's face went pale as she read the preliminary damage assessment. Total orbital defense grid destroyed, major infrastructure demolished. Over 2 million civilians believed dead or captured. Give me Admiral Harrison at Earth Command. She ordered her aide. And convene an emergency session of the Colonial Council. This is an act of war. Earth Command headquarters, buried deep beneath the Swiss Alps, erupted into controlled chaos as officers and analysts scrambled to understand what had happened. Admiral William Harrison, Chief of Fleet Operations, stared at the holographic display showing humanity's expansion into the galaxy. New Eden's marker now pulsed red, fallen. What do we know about the attacking force? Harrison asked his intelligence chief. 47 vessels of unknown design, all significantly larger than our largest warships. The attack pattern suggests a highly advanced military force with experience in planetary assault operations. They knew exactly what to target to minimize our defenses while preserving infrastructure. Harrison's jaw tightened. Slavers. The intelligence officer nodded grimly. That's our assessment, sir. This wasn't random destruction, it was conquest. On the frontier world of Kepler's Rest, colonists gathered around communication hubs to listen to the news broadcasts from Earth. The reports were still fragmentary, but the basic facts were clear. Humanity's first agricultural colony had been destroyed by an unknown alien force. Families were missing. Children were dead. In the mining colonies of the asteroid belt, work stopped entirely as the news spread. Miners who had never seen combat began asking about military service. Applications to join the Colonial Defense Force flooded recruitment centers across human space. But nowhere was the reaction more intense than among the crews of the Third Fleet. Aboard the destroyer Valkyrie, Chief Petty Officer Miguel Rodriguez stared at the official notification on his personal tablet. His brother's family had been visiting New Eden for the Harvest Festival. 3 generations of his family, gone in a single day. Chief, you okay? Asked Seaman Parker, one of the younger crew members. Miguel looked up, and Parker saw something in the older man's eyes that made him step back. They killed my nephew, Miguel said quietly. Little Carlos was only 8 years old. He wanted to be a pilot like his uncle Miguel. Similar scenes played out across every ship in the fleet. The mess halls fell silent as crew members received word about their losses. In the engineering sections, normally cheerful banter was replaced by the grim efficiency of professionals preparing for war. In the weapons bays, ordnance technicians worked with a focus that their officers had never seen before. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Indomitable, looking out at her fleet as it prepared to move. 63 ships, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels representing the largest concentration of human military power in the galaxy. They had been designed to protect human colonies from pirates and to serve as ambassadors of Earth's peaceful intentions as humanity expanded into the stars. Now they would become something else entirely. Commander Walsh approached carefully. Admiral, we're receiving communications from Earth Command. Admiral Harrison is ordering us to maintain position pending further instructions. Sarah didn't turn around. What's our estimated travel time to New Eden? At maximum burn, 11 days through hyperspace. And how long would it take for Earth Command to assemble a response fleet? Walsh hesitated. 6 to 8 weeks, ma'am. Most of our heavy ships are scattered across the colonies. Sarah nodded slowly. By the time Earth sends help, the trail will be cold. Our families will be scattered across slave markets on a dozen different worlds, if they're still alive at all. She turned to face her aide, and Walsh saw the same terrifying resolve that had swept through the fleet reflected in her admiral's eyes. Commander, signal all ship captains. Emergency meeting in Conference Room Alpha in 1 hour. And Walsh, yes, Admiral. Draft a message to Earth Command. Inform them that the Third Fleet is moving to investigate the attack on New Eden and will provide a full report upon our return. Walsh's eyes widened. Ma'am, those aren't our orders. Admiral Harrison specifically. I know what Admiral Harrison said, Sarah replied. But, right now, I don't care about orders from people who've never had their families butchered by alien slavers. The Third Fleet has one mission: bring our people home. An hour later, the senior officers of the Third Fleet assembled in the conference room aboard the Indomitable. These were seasoned professionals who had served together for years. But the atmosphere was unlike anything they had ever experienced. The grief in the room was palpable, mixed with something else, a cold, burning anger that seemed to make the very air dangerous to breathe. Captain Elena Reyes of the cruiser Retribution spoke first. Admiral, I've got 47 crew members who lost family on New Eden. They're requesting permission to transfer to combat positions. Captain James Kirk of the destroyer Fury added, Same here. My people are ready to fight. One by one, the reports came in. Across the fleet, thousands of men and women were volunteering for the most dangerous assignments. Anything that would bring them closer to the enemy that had murdered their families. Sarah looked around the table at faces she had known for years. Officers who had shared meals with her, who had served with distinction in peacekeeping operations across human space. Now they looked like something else entirely. They looked like wolves. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah began, her voice carrying absolute authority. We all know what happened at New Eden. We all know that Earth Command will want us to wait for orders, to follow proper procedures, to let diplomats and politicians decide how to respond. She stood, placing her hands flat on the conference table. We're not going to wait. The room erupted in quiet affirmations, officers nodding and whispering their agreement. Sarah continued, The Third Fleet is going to New Eden. We're going to find out who did this. We're going to track them down. And we're going to make them regret the day they decided to attack human civilians. Captain Morrison, her most senior officer, raised a concern. Admiral, Earth Command will consider this mutiny. We could all face court-martial. Sarah smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Let them try. By the time we get back, there won't be enough of the enemy left to dispute our version of events. The transformation of the Third Fleet began immediately. Ships that had been designed for patrol and peacekeeping duties were rapidly reconfigured for war. Weapon systems that had rarely been fired except in training were checked and double-checked. Marines practiced boarding operations. Pilots ran combat simulations until their eyes burned. But the most significant change was in the crews themselves. The men and women of the Third Fleet had been professional soldiers, but they had been fighting for abstract concepts: peace, order, humanity's expansion into the galaxy. Now they were fighting for something much more personal and infinitely more dangerous. They were fighting for family. Chief Rodriguez worked 18-hour shifts in the Valkyrie's weapons bay, personally inspecting every missile, every torpedo, every round of ammunition that might be used to avenge his nephew. Little Carlos wanted to see the ocean on Earth someday, he told his crew. Somebody's going to pay for that dream dying with him. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out. Engineers pushed ship systems beyond their recommended limits. Intelligence officers analyzed every scrap of data from New Eden, building detailed profiles of the enemy ships. Medical personnel prepared for the casualties that were sure to come. And, in quiet moments, when the official duties were done, crew members gathered in small groups to share memories of the people they had lost. They spoke of sisters who had sent letters about successful harvests, of brothers who had been planning to visit for the holidays, of children who would never grow up to see the stars their parents had died trying to reach. As the Third Fleet prepared to depart, Admiral Sarah Chun stood once more on the observation deck, watching her ships move into formation. They were no longer just vessels of exploration and defense. They had become something that the galaxy had never seen before, the concentrated fury of a species that protected its own with absolute ruthlessness. The Zeltharians had destroyed New Eden thinking they were conquering just another weak agricultural colony. They had no idea they had just awakened something that would hunt them across the galaxy until every last one of them paid for their crime. The Third Fleet was no longer bound by the gentle rules of peacekeeping. They were bound by something much older and infinitely more powerful: The ancient human promise that those who harmed the innocent would face consequences beyond their darkest nightmares. As the ships engaged their hyperspace drives and vanished into the void, heading toward the ruins of New Eden, a new chapter in galactic history began to write itself. It would be written in plasma fire and righteous anger, and its authors would be the children of Earth, coming to collect a debt that could only be paid in blood. The Third Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of New Eden's solar system 11 days after receiving the distress signals, their ships emerging from the void like vengeful spirits materializing from humanity's darkest dreams. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, staring at the tactical display that showed what remained of the colony her sister had called home. Where once there had been a thriving agricultural world, now there was only devastation. The orbital defense platform Heaven's Gate was gone, its debris field spreading across space like the scattered bones of humanity's first line of defense. The planet's surface showed massive heat signatures from the plasma bombardment, dark scars visible even from orbit where fertile farmland had been turned to glass. "Life signs?" Sarah asked, though her voice betrayed little hope. Lieutenant Commander Park, the fleet's chief sensor operator, worked his console with grim efficiency, detecting approximately 800,000 human life signs scattered across the planet's surface. They appeared to be concentrated in what were emergency shelter locations. 800,000 survivors out of over 2 million. Sarah's hands clenched into fists behind her back. "Any sign of the attacking force?" "Negative, Admiral. But we're picking up residual energy signatures consistent with large-scale hyperspace jumps. Whatever hit this place left 3 days ago." Captain Morrison stepped closer to the tactical display, studying the orbital debris patterns. "Admiral, look at this." The attack was surgical. They took out infrastructure and military targets, but left enough intact to support a surviving population. This wasn't genocide, it was conquest. Sarah nodded grimly. "Slavers. They wanted workers, not corpses." She turned to her communications officer. "Open a channel to the planet. All frequencies." The response came almost immediately, weak and desperate voices speaking over improvised radio equipment. Dr. James Patterson, somehow still alive in the ruins of the Central Command building, was the first to respond. This is Colonial Administrator Patterson. My God, are those human ships?" "Dr. Patterson, this is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Third Fleet. We received your distress signal. What's the status of the colony?" There was a long pause, filled with static and the sound of Patterson's labored breathing. "Admiral, they came without warning. 47 ships, maybe more. They destroyed our defenses in minutes, then began systematic bombardment of all our major facilities. When they finished," his voice broke. "When they finished, they sent ground forces to collect survivors. They took over 1 million people, Admiral, loaded them onto ships like cargo." The bridge of the Indomitable fell silent. Every officer present had family members among those taken, and the confirmation of their worst fears hit like physical blows. Sarah forced herself to remain calm. "Dr. Patterson, do you have any information about the attackers? Ship designs, technology, anything that might help us track them?" "We managed to capture some sensor data before they destroyed our arrays. Dr. Elizabeth Kim in the research center survived. She's been analyzing what we recorded." Within an hour, shuttles from the fleet were landing in the ruins of New Eden, their crews emerging to witness firsthand the devastation that would fuel their quest for vengeance. The golden wheat fields were gone, replaced by fields of cooling black glass that crunched under their boots. The cities where children had played were reduced to skeletal remains of twisted metal and shattered concrete. Dr. Kim met the shuttle crews at what remained of the research center, a small woman in her 50s whose clothes were torn and stained with ash, but whose eyes burned with fierce intelligence. She carried a portable data core that contained the colony's final recordings of the attack. "Admiral Chun," Dr. Kim said as Sarah emerged from her shuttle, "I've been waiting for you. We captured detailed scans of the attacking ships before our sensors were destroyed." Back aboard the Indomitable, the fleet's senior officers gathered in the main conference room to review the data Dr. Kim had rescued from the ruins. The holographic display showed detailed three-dimensional models of the Zeltharian ships, their dark hulls and predatory lines clearly visible. These vessels show clear signs of advanced military technology, Dr. Kim explained, manipulating the display to highlight key features. Notice the configuration of their weapon systems. They're designed for planetary assault operations. This wasn't their first attack. Captain Elena Reyes leaned forward, studying the enemy ship designs. Any idea about their origin? Dr. Kim nodded grimly. Cross-referencing with our databases, the closest match is with energy signatures detected by deep space monitoring stations near the Andromeda sector. These attackers came from outside our local stellar neighborhood. Admiral Sarah activated the room's strategic display, showing a three-dimensional map of known space. If they're from the Andromeda sector, that's 6 months of travel time through hyperspace. They didn't just stumble across New Eden, they planned this attack. Commander Walsh, who had been quietly analyzing the tactical data, spoke up. Admiral, there's something else. Look at the pattern of their bombardment. The display shifted to show the attack sequence. They knew exactly where to strike to disable our defenses while preserving maximum infrastructure. Someone provided them with detailed intelligence about New Eden's layout. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The implication was clear. Someone had betrayed New Eden to the attackers, providing the intelligence that made the conquest possible. We'll deal with the traitors later, Sarah said, her voice carrying a promise of retribution that made several officers unconsciously straighten in their seats. Right now, our priority is tracking down the attackers and recovering our people. Captain Morrison raised a concern that had been weighing on all their minds. Admiral, even if we can track them, we're talking about 47 enemy ships against 63 of ours. And their vessels are significantly larger than anything in our fleet. Sarah smiled. And it was the expression of a predator who had finally caught the scent of prey. Captain, you're thinking like a peacekeeper. We're not peacekeepers anymore. We're hunters. She activated another section of the display, showing the Third Fleet's modified configuration. For the past 11 days, our crews have been reconfiguring our ships for maximum combat efficiency. We've stripped out non-essential systems, rerouted power to weapons and shields, and loaded every available space with additional ammunition. The changes were impressive. Ships that had been designed for long-duration patrol missions had been transformed into lean, deadly instruments of war. The Indomitable alone now carried 3 times its normal complement of missiles and torpedo warheads. But, more importantly, Sarah continued, we have something they don't expect. They think they attacked an isolated agricultural colony with no military support. They have no idea that they just declared war on humanity, and humanity is about to show them what that means. Dr. Kim had been quietly working on her data analysis during the strategic briefing. Now she looked up with something that might have been hope in her eyes. Admiral, I've been tracking the energy signatures from their hyperspace jumps. Based on the dispersal patterns and the power requirements for ships of that size, I believe I can project their most likely destination. The display shifted again, showing several star systems in the Andromeda sector highlighted in different colors. The orange systems are the most probable destinations based on their fuel consumption patterns. The red systems are secondary possibilities. Sarah studied the projections carefully. How confident are you in these calculations? 73% for the primary targets, 51% for the secondary ones. But, Admiral, there's something else. If they're slavers operating on this scale, they're not just raiders, they're part of a larger organization. A civilization that builds ships like these and operates coordinated fleets has to have a substantial industrial base. Captain Reyes understood the implication immediately. You're saying this wasn't just an isolated attack. This is part of a larger pattern of conquest. Dr. Kim nodded grimly. Which means our people aren't just being held somewhere. They're being integrated into an existing slave labor system. If we're going to rescue them, we need to move quickly before they're dispersed across multiple worlds. The briefing continued for several more hours as the fleet's officers planned their pursuit of the attackers. Intelligence teams analyzed every scrap of data from the attack, building detailed profiles of enemy capabilities. Engineering crews worked around the clock to optimize ship systems for the long journey ahead. Marines practiced boarding operations designed specifically for the enemy ship configurations they had observed. But perhaps the most significant preparation was psychological. The men and Women of the Third Fleet were transforming themselves from peacekeeping forces into something the galaxy had never seen before. Human warriors driven by a combination of advanced technology and primal rage that made them infinitely more dangerous than the sum of their parts. Chief Rodriguez, whose nephew had died in the attack, had volunteered to lead a boarding team despite his age and non-combat specialty. When his commanding officer questioned the assignment, Rodriguez's response had become legendary throughout the fleet. "Sir, I've been taking care of machines my whole career. Now I want to take care of the bastards who killed my family." Similar transformations were happening throughout the fleet. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the fleet's chief medical officer, had requested combat training so she could provide medical assistance to enemy survivors of our boarding actions. When asked what kind of medical assistance, her smile had been cold enough to freeze plasma. The psychological profiles being developed by the fleet's intelligence teams painted a picture of enemy forces that had grown comfortable with easy conquests against technologically inferior civilizations. The Zeltharians had been expanding their empire for centuries, crushing resistance through overwhelming force, and taking what they wanted without significant opposition. They had never faced an opponent that combined advanced technology with the primal fury of a species that protected its young with absolute ruthlessness. They were about to learn that destroying a human colony hadn't just been an act of conquest. It had been a declaration of war against predators who had clawed their way to the top of Earth's food chain. As the Third Fleet prepared to depart New Eden and begin their hunt, Admiral Sarah Chun made one final transmission to the survivors on the planet's surface. "People of New Eden, this is Admiral Chun. We're going after the ones who did this to you. We're going to find our families, and we're going to make the attackers pay for every life they took, for every child they stole, for every dream they destroyed." Her voice carried across the ruined planet to emergency shelters where survivors huddled in the darkness, and for the first time since the attack, some of them began to hope. "The Third Fleet is going to war," Sarah continued, "and we won't stop until every last one of our people comes home." As the fleet's ships engaged their hyperspace drives and vanished into the void, heading toward the Andromeda sector and their appointment with vengeance, the survivors of New Eden began the long process of rebuilding their world. But they would not rebuild alone. Word of New Eden's destruction and the Third Fleet's pursuit was already spreading through human space, and something was awakening in the hearts of Earth's children that the galaxy had never seen before. Humanity was learning to hunt as a species, and their prey had just made the fatal mistake of teaching them why that was necessary. The Third Fleet emerged from hyperspace in the Kepler 442 system after a 17-day pursuit that had taken them deeper into unexplored space than any human expedition had ever ventured. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, studying the tactical display that showed what Dr. Kim's calculations had predicted, evidence of a massive alien civilization. "My God," whispered Captain Morrison as the sensor readings came in. "Admiral, we're detecting industrial activity on a scale beyond anything in human space." The Kepler 442 system contained 7 planets, and 4 of them showed clear signs of extensive industrial development. Massive orbital shipyards surrounded the second planet, their skeletal frameworks extending for hundreds of kilometers. The third planet's entire surface glowed with the heat signatures of planetary-scale manufacturing complexes. Most disturbing of all, the fourth planet showed the distinctive energy patterns of large-scale agricultural operations worked by forced labor. "Life sign analysis," Sarah ordered, though she already suspected what they would find. Lieutenant Commander Park's voice was tight with controlled rage as he reported his findings. "Admiral, we're detecting approximately 43 million sentient life forms on the fourth planet. Energy signature analysis suggests at least 12 different species, including human." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet humming of ship systems. After nearly 3 weeks of pursuit, they had found their people, along with evidence that the Zeltharians had been conducting similar operations for decades, possibly centuries. "Enemy fleet composition?" Sarah asked. 67 capital ships detected in system, plus an unknown number of smaller vessels. The majority appear to be clustered around the industrial facilities on planets 2 and 3. Sarah activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All ships, This is Admiral Chun. We've found our people, but we've also found something else. We're looking at the core of a slave empire that spans multiple worlds and has been operating for generations. The attack on New Eden wasn't an isolated incident. It was standard operating procedure. She paused, letting that sink in across the 63 ships of her fleet. Our mission parameters have just changed. We're no longer just here to rescue the survivors of New Eden. We're here to make sure this never happens again to any species, anywhere in the galaxy. The response from the fleet was immediate and unanimous. Ship after ship reported battle readiness, their crews eager to begin the work of justice that had brought them across half the galaxy. But before any action could be taken, the communication board on the Indomitable lit up with an incoming transmission. The signal was powerful, clearly coming from the industrial complex on the second planet, and it was definitely not human. Admiral, the communications officer reported, we're receiving a transmission on standard diplomatic frequencies. The message is being translated through our universal communication protocols. Put it through, Sarah ordered. The voice that emerged from the speakers was harsh, guttural, speaking in tones that suggested a species unused to being challenged. Unknown vessels, you have entered sovereign territory of the Zeltharian Empire. Identify yourselves and state your business, or prepare to be destroyed. Sarah took a moment to compose her response, drawing on 30 years of military training to project calm authority despite the fury burning in her chest. This is Admiral Sarah Chun, commanding the 3rd Fleet of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You are in possession of human citizens taken from the colony world of New Eden. We're here to take them back. There was a long pause before the alien voice responded, and when it did, there was an unmistakable tone of amusement. Humans. Yes, we recently acquired a shipment of your species. They are being processed for integration into our labor force, as a standard procedure for all conquered populations. You may purchase them back at standard market rates if you wish to negotiate. The bridge crew of the Indomitable exchanged glances that could have melted steel. The casual tone in which the alien spoke of processing human beings like livestock was more enraging than any threat could have been. Sarah's voice remained steady, but everyone who knew her recognized the deadly calm that preceded her most decisive actions. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. We're not here to negotiate. We're here to inform you that you have exactly 1 hour to release all human prisoners and surrender the vessels used in the attack on New Eden. The alien laughter that came through the speakers was like the sound of breaking glass. Admiral Chun, you command 63 vessels against the full might of the Zeltharian Empire. Your people told us interesting things during their processing about human military capabilities. You are severely outgunned and completely outmatched. Withdraw from our territory now, or we will add your ships to our fleet and your crews to our labor force. Sarah smiled, and every officer on the bridge felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Fleet Commander, you've just made 2 critical errors in judgment. And what might those be? The alien voice asked with continued amusement. First, Sarah said, you assumed that we came here to negotiate. We didn't. We came here to teach you what happens when you attack human civilians. She activated her tactical display, showing the deployment of the 3rd Fleet around the system's periphery. Second, you assumed that this was all the force humanity could bring to bear against your empire. You were wrong about that too. As if summoned by her words, space around the Kepler 442 system began to ripple with hyperspace emergent signatures. One by one, additional human fleets began dropping out of hyperspace. The 2nd Fleet from the core worlds, the 5th Fleet from the frontier territories, the 7th Fleet from the mining colonies, and dozens of smaller task forces from across human space. Admiral Harrison's voice came through on the command channel from his flagship, the massive battleship Retribution. Admiral Chun, this is Admiral Harrison commanding the combined human battle fleet. We received your tactical reports and decided that the 3rd Fleet shouldn't have all the fun. Sarah's smile widened as she watched the tactical display update to show over 300 human warships taking position throughout the system. Admiral Harrison, I thought Earth Command disapproved of unauthorized military actions. Earth Command, Harrison replied with evident satisfaction, decided that the destruction of New Eden constituted an act of war against all of humanity. The Colonial Council authorized a proportional response under the Mutual Defense Charter. The alien transmission channel had gone ominously quiet as Zeltharian sensors undoubtedly detected the massive human fleet materializing around their core system. When the voice finally returned, the amusement was gone, replaced by something approaching concern. Admiral Chun, this is an unexpected development. Perhaps there is room for negotiation after all. Sarah's voice turned arctic. Oh, there's definitely going to be negotiation. But not the kind you're thinking of. She activated the fleet-wide communication system, her words reaching every human ship in the system and recording for transmission back to Earth. People of the Zeltharian Empire, my name is Admiral Sarah Chun. 3 weeks ago, your forces attacked and destroyed the human colony of New Eden, killing over 1 million innocent civilians and enslaving another million. You did this because you thought humanity was weak and helpless. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle across the alien civilization that was suddenly discovering they were no longer the predators in this equation. You were wrong. The fleet you see before you represents the combined military might of humanity. Over 300 of our most advanced warships, crewed by beings whose families you murdered and whose children you enslaved. We are not here for conquest. We are here for justice. The tactical display showed Zeltharian ships beginning to move, but their formations were defensive, not aggressive. They were clearly struggling to understand how a species they had easily conquered just weeks ago had suddenly appeared in their home system with overwhelming force. These are our terms, Sarah continued. You will immediately release all human prisoners. You will surrender the vessels used in the attack on New Eden. You will provide full compensation to the survivors of your attack. And you will formally surrender your government to stand trial for crimes against sentient life. The alien voice, when it returned, was no longer arrogant, but desperate. Admiral, you don't understand the complexity of our empire. We have conquered hundreds of species, enslaved billions of beings. Our economy, our society, our entire civilization is built on conquest and expansion. What you're asking would mean the complete destruction of our way of life. Sarah's response was immediate and absolute. Yes, it would. That's exactly what we're asking for. She activated a different channel, this one connecting her directly to the orbital shipyards around the second planet. Attention Zeltharian military forces. You have 60 minutes to begin the release of all prisoners and the surrender of your attack fleets. If you do not comply, we will begin military operations designed to cripple your ability to continue enslaving other species. To emphasize her point, Sarah ordered a demonstration of human firepower. The battleship Devastator fired a single plasma cannon burst at an abandoned asteroid in the outer system. The asteroid, roughly the size of a small moon, was vaporized in a flash of superheated gas that lit up the entire system. The demonstration had its intended effect. Zeltharian communications channels erupted with panic chatter as their military leaders realized that the humans possessed weapons that could eliminate their orbital installations from across the solar system. But Admiral Chun was not relying solely on displays of force. The human fleet had spent 3 weeks preparing for this confrontation, and their preparations went far beyond simple military planning. Dr. Kim, now serving as the fleet's chief intelligence analyst, had been working with teams of xenobiologists and social scientists to understand Zeltharian society. Their findings painted a picture of a civilization that had grown complacent through centuries of easy conquest, but also one that was fundamentally unstable. Admiral, Dr. Kim reported from her station on the Indomitable. We're intercepting communications from the slave worlds. Word of our arrival is spreading rapidly, and we're detecting signs of uprising among the enslaved populations. The human fleet's arrival had done more than just threaten Zeltharian military forces. It had provided hope to billions of enslaved beings across the empire. Species that had been conquered and broken by Zeltharian brutality were suddenly discovering that their oppressors were not invincible. On the fourth planet, human prisoners who had been taken from New Eden were working in agricultural facilities when the news of the fleet's arrival spread through the slave barracks. Maria Santos, who had been separated from her daughter Carmen during the initial processing, found herself standing with other human survivors as they watched Zeltharian guards arguing frantically with their supervisors. "Mom, are those really Earth ships?" asked a young man named David Park, whose parents had died in the initial attack on New Eden. Maria looked up at the night sky, where the distant flashes of human ships could be seen moving against the stars. For the first time in 3 weeks, she allowed herself to hope. "Yes, David, I think they are." The negotiations, if they could be called that, continued for the remainder of the hour that Admiral Chun had specified. Zeltharian leaders, faced with the sudden arrival of a human fleet that outgunned their entire home defense force, tried desperately to find terms that would allow them to maintain some semblance of their empire. But the humans were not in a negotiating mood. They had crossed half the galaxy for justice, and they were not leaving until they had it. As the deadline approached, Admiral Harrison opened a private channel to Admiral Chun. "Sarah, our intelligence teams have identified the location of the Zeltharian High Command. If we're going to end this empire permanently, that's where we need to strike." Sarah nodded, watching as her tactical teams finalized their assault plans. "Agreed. But first, we get our people back. Every last one of them." The hour deadline passed with no response from the Zeltharian government. Admiral Chun took a deep breath, thinking of her sister Maria and her niece Carmen somewhere in the slave facilities below, and gave the order that would change galactic history forever. "All ships, this is Admiral Chun. Operation Righteous Fury is now authorized. Begin liberation operations immediately." The combined human battle fleet moved into action with precision that spoke of weeks of planning and decades of training. But, more than that, they moved with the focused determination of a species that had finally decided to show the galaxy exactly what happened when someone attacked their families. The Zeltharian Empire was about to learn why that had been a fatal mistake. Operation Righteous Fury began at precisely 1430 ship time, when the combined human battle fleet opened fire on Zeltharian military installations across the Kepler 442 system. The attack was not random or vindictive. It was surgical, precise, and absolutely devastating to the infrastructure that had supported 3 centuries of slavery and conquest. Admiral Sarah Chun watched from the bridge of the Indomitable as her tactical display showed the systematic dismantling of an empire. Human plasma cannons, firing with accuracy that astonished even their operators, eliminated Zeltharian warships with single shots. Torpedo spreads launched from human destroyers crippled orbital shipyards that had been building slave ships for generations. The massive industrial complexes that had processed the wealth stolen from 100 conquered worlds began to burn under the focused fire of humanity's finest weapons. But the most important part of the operation was happening on the surface of the 4th planet, where human Marines were conducting the largest prisoner rescue operation in galactic history. Commander Jessica Torres led the first wave of shuttles down to the agricultural facilities where the New Eden survivors were being held. The Zeltharian guards, faced with the sudden appearance of human soldiers equipped with power armor and weapons they had never seen before, offered no resistance. Most simply fled, abandoning their posts as the reality of their empire's collapse became undeniable. In Barracks Block 7, Maria Santos was holding Carmen close when the doors burst open and human Marines in combat armor came through. The lead Marine removed her helmet, revealing the face of a woman Maria recognized from the colony's defense briefings. "Mrs. Santos, I'm Commander Torres with the 3rd Fleet Marines. Your sister sent us to bring you home." Maria began to cry, not from sadness, but from a relief so overwhelming she could barely speak. "Sarah? Admiral Sarah Chun is my sister." Commander Torres smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she had worn since leaving human space. "Yes, ma'am. And she's got some very strong opinions about people who take her family." Across the planet, similar scenes played out as human rescue teams liberated thousands of prisoners from New Eden and millions more from other species that had been enslaved by the Zeltharians. The operation was massive in scope, but executed with the precision that characterized everything the human fleet had done since arriving in the system. Dr. Elizabeth Kim, who had survived the attack on New Eden and provided the intelligence that made the pursuit possible, found herself aboard the battleship Retribution analyzing intercepted Zeltharian communications as their empire collapsed around them. "Admiral Harrison," she reported, we're detecting surrender broadcasts from 17 different Zeltharian worlds. It appears the news of their defeat is spreading faster than their government can control. Admiral Harrison nodded with satisfaction as he watched his tactical display. It turns out that an empire built on the fear of overwhelming force becomes very fragile when they're no longer the ones with overwhelming force. The end of the Zeltharian Empire came not with a final desperate battle, but with a cascade of surrenders as word spread that their seemingly invincible fleet had been destroyed by beings they had casually enslaved just weeks before. World after world threw off Zeltharian control, often aided by the very slave populations that had been oppressed for generations. But Admiral Sarah Chun was not satisfied with merely defeating the Zeltharians. She wanted to send a message that would echo across the galaxy, ensuring that no other species would ever again make the mistake of attacking human civilians. 3 days after the initial assault, she ordered the human fleet to the Zeltharian homeworld of Zelthtar Prime, where the Empire's leadership had been desperately trying to organize a final defense. The planet was surrounded by the most advanced defensive systems the Zeltharians possessed, orbital platforms bristling with weapons that had never been tested against a determined enemy. The human fleet destroyed them all in under 6 hours. Admiral Chin stood on the observation deck of the Indomitable as her ships took up position around the Zeltharian homeworld. Below her, the planet's population of nearly 12 billion beings waited to learn their fate at the hands of the species they had tried to enslave. Commander Walsh approached carefully. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Zeltharian High Command. They're requesting terms for surrender." Sarah turned away from the viewport, her expression showing no mercy but also no cruelty. Only the implacable determination of someone who had seen justice done. "Very well. Escort their leaders to the retribution for formal surrender ceremonies." The surrender took place in the main conference room of Admiral Harrison's flagship, with representatives from dozens of liberated species watching as the Zeltharian High Command formally dissolved their empire and submitted to judgment by the newly formed Galactic Liberation Council. High Commander Zekthal, the same Zeltharian who had ordered the attack on New Eden, stood before Admiral Chun with his head bowed in defeat. The proud reptilian features that had once sneered at human weakness were now marked by the fear of beings who had discovered they were no longer the predators in the galactic ecosystem. "High Commander," Admiral Chin said formally, "by the authority vested in me by the Human Colonial Defense Force and the Galactic Liberation Council, I charge you and your government with crimes against sentient life, including genocide, slavery, and the unprovoked attack on peaceful civilian populations." Zekthal's voice was barely a whisper as he replied, "We surrender unconditionally to human authority." But Admiral Chun was not finished. "High Commander, I want you to understand something. The attack on New Eden was not just a military defeat for your empire. It was a catastrophic error in judgment that has changed the balance of power in this galaxy forever." She gestured to the viewport, where the liberated fleets of dozens of species could be seen taking positions alongside human ships. "You thought you were attacking a helpless agricultural colony. Instead, you awakened something that your empire could never defeat: the united fury of every species that values freedom over conquest." The formal proceedings continued for several hours as the terms of Zeltharian surrender were finalized. The Empire's remaining fleet would be dismantled, their industrial capacity redirected toward reparations for their victims, and their leadership would stand trial before a court composed of representatives from every species they had enslaved. But for Admiral Sarah Chun, the most important moment came when she was reunited with her sister Maria and niece Carmen aboard the Indomitable. The three women stood together in Sarah's quarters, holding each other and crying tears of relief, grief, and gratitude. "I thought I'd lost you both," Sarah whispered, stroking Carmen's hair as the 10-year-old clung to her aunt. "We never gave up hope," Maria replied. "Even in the slave barracks, when everything seemed hopeless, I told Carmen that her Aunt Sarah would come for us." Carmen looked up at her aunt with eyes that had seen too much for someone so young but still held the innocent trust of childhood. "Are the bad people going to hurt anyone else, Aunt Sarah?" Sarah knelt down to Carmen's level, taking her niece's hands in her own. "No, sweetheart. We're going to make sure they never hurt anyone again." The human fleet remained in the former Zeltharian space for 3 months, overseeing the liberation of slave worlds and the establishment of new governments based on the principles of freedom and self-determination. The operation became known as the Great Liberation, and it fundamentally changed the political landscape of the galaxy. Species that had been enslaved for generations suddenly found themselves free to rebuild their civilizations. The massive industrial capacity that had been used to build slave ships was redirected toward reconstruction efforts. Most importantly, the dozen species that had been liberated by human intervention formed the nucleus of what would become the Galactic Federation, a mutual defense alliance designed to prevent any future empire from rising to threaten peaceful civilizations. Admiral Harrison stood with Admiral Chun on the bridge of the Retribution as they prepared to return to human space, their mission finally complete. Sarah, what we've accomplished here will be remembered for generations. We didn't just rescue our people. We liberated an entire sector of the galaxy. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. We also taught the galaxy something important, Bill. We showed them that humanity will travel across the void itself to protect our own, and that anyone who harms human civilians will face consequences beyond their worst nightmares. The return journey to human space took 5 weeks, but it was a triumphant voyage marked by celebrations at every human colony they passed. Word of the Third Fleet's victory had spread throughout human civilization, and Admiral Chin found herself hailed as a hero wherever she went. But perhaps the most significant long-term consequence of the Great Liberation was the message it sent to other potential aggressors in the galaxy. The destruction of the Zeltharian Empire had demonstrated that humanity, despite being newcomers to the galactic stage, possessed both the technological capability and the moral determination to oppose tyranny wherever they found it. 3 years later, Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the Memorial Garden on New Eden, which had been rebuilt as a monument to those who died in the Zeltharian attack and those who had fought to liberate their families. The garden was beautiful, with flowers from dozens of worlds planted by representatives of the species that had been freed during the Great Liberation. Carmen, now 13 and growing into a confident young woman, placed flowers at the memorial wall where her father's name was inscribed along with those of all the other victims. Aunt Sarah, do you think Dad would be proud of what we did? Sarah put her arm around her niece, looking at the names of the dead carved into the black stone wall. I think your father would be proud that his sacrifice helped save millions of other families from going through what we went through. Maria joined them at the memorial, carrying flowers from the new wheat fields that now grew where plasma bombardment had once left only glass. The memorial committee wants to add something to the inscription, Sarah. They want to include a message about what the Third Fleet accomplished. Sarah read the proposed addition, in memory of those who died at New Eden, and in honor of those who ensured their sacrifice would never be in vain. Their deaths awakened the sleeping guardian of the galaxy, humanity's promise that the innocent will always be protected. She nodded her approval. That's appropriate. But add one more line. Destroying a human colony was their initial error. The Armada of Vengeance was their final lesson. As the 3 women stood together in the memorial garden, ships from dozens of species passed overhead, traders, diplomats, and explorers traveling freely through space that had once been dominated by the Zeltharian slave empire. The galaxy was a freer place because of what had happened at New Eden, and the legend of humanity's response would serve as a warning to any future aggressors. The Zeltharian Empire had thought they were conquering just another weak species when they attacked New Eden. Instead, they had awakened something that the galaxy had never seen before, the focused fury of a civilization that protected its own with absolute ruthlessness and possessed the technological means to make that protection felt across the void. The lesson was simple but profound: harm humanity's children and face the consequences. The galaxy had learned that lesson well, and would remember it for generations to come. Admiral Sarah Chun looked up at the ships passing overhead, representatives of dozens of free species that now explored the galaxy without fear of enslavement. The price of their freedom had been paid in the blood and sacrifice of New Eden's victims, but from that sacrifice had come something beautiful, a galaxy where tyranny could not flourish because somewhere among the stars, humanity watched and waited, ready to cross any distance, and pay any price to ensure that justice prevailed. The Armada of Vengeance had completed its mission. The legend would live forever.